Welcome to Beyond Gallery Walls. I'm Patric Stillman.
And I'm Redin Winter, and we are having conversations about the art world from the perspective of artists and art patrons. Thank you for joining us.
Today's episode is Why Starve? Opportunities and Resources for Artists Where You Live. So Redin, one thing that really irks me is that this trope of a starving artist. Don't you find that a little irritating?
Well, yeah, because again, we see people who are not starving artists, number one, but the idea is that you somehow have to be in pain to be an artist, and like if you are sort of making money from your art, that maybe you're not a real artist now, maybe you're something else. There's so much opportunity out there for people to find ways to where they don't have to be a starving artist, especially now. So I find the trope to be historically in the past and not what we need to be talking about.
Yeah, I think it's totally something that we need to get rid of. I think that it sort of like presupposes that one entity is going to turn you into a star. One opportunity, one patron, one gateway is going to change your world. And I don't think that's really how artists operate in the world today.
No, it's ebbs and flows, right? You'll even see somebody who actually has like that break, quote unquote, and it maybe works for them for a little bit. And then all of a sudden they're back on the ebb side and now they have to work and find another opportunity. I think that we've said, I know you and I have talked about it, this is a journey. If you want to be an artist or call yourself an artist, you got to get ready for the journey. And the journey is consistent working on your craft and working to get your stuff out there, find opportunities, etc.
Exactly. There is no such thing as an overnight success.
Absolutely not.
You can't just one day sit down at a canvas, pick up some paints, slop some paint on there and go, oh, I'm a master.
And that narrative is overplayed so much in all sorts of art forms.
Right.
And it's starting to come out where, I remember they said that about Lizzo. They said that about a couple of different actors. And then the actors and Lizzo come out and said, you might not have seen me on the scene, but I was working really hard in my particular town for years upon years, working on my craft, putting myself out there. So there is no such thing as an overnight success.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a nice myth, but I think there's another trope that causes me a lot of concern, and that is no matter what city I've lived in, I hear artists who say, oh, there's no art scene here, and they feel like they need to go elsewhere to become recognized for their craft.
Why do you think they say that? What do you think is what makes them go, oh, there's no art scene? Is it the definition of what they're thinking art scene is?
Well, we come to the craft in so many different ways. I'm not sure that there's a universal reason why, but I do feel that a lot of the sort of foundation of the art world is not newsworthy. It's not the sexy thing you see on the news. It's not foundation giving a lot of money. It's people working hard behind the scenes. Galleries who are commercial spaces. That's not something you typically see or hear or read about in the news or on the radio. And I think that an artist, slogging away in their studio is not, all that appealing because it's not a universal thing that's going to give an audience the understanding that something great is just about to happen.
Yeah, it reminds me because often when we're talking about like financial, like the big grants and things like that, you might hear it for like a nonprofit, you might hear it for a very specific event or big arts thing going on, but it's very rarely that it's either going to sort of the artist themselves or a sort of commercial mid-level community type gallery, right? So there's a lot of hustle. there's a lot of hustle for artists and for sort of spaces like the one that we're in right now to make it sustain itself and to make it work, because you're not getting a lot of that extra funding, if you will, or the opportunity to even apply to some of those sorts of things.
Yeah, I think like news broadcasts are interested in the event that's taking place, that's citywide, or the government has decided to fund the arts or something along those lines.
Right.
And the hard work is not being presented in front of all of the artists, but it's there, and it's there on so many levels. I think that in any city that you live in, there is great opportunity. You don't have to be just in a metropolitan area.
Yeah, so we're located right now in San Diego. It's not necessarily quote unquote, people would say, oh, the art scene in San Diego. It's the beaches, some of the museums, right, spaces, the parks, the weather. But we have a huge art scene here, often overlooked. But I would say that for anywhere, wherever you live, whether it is the smallest of places, there's opportunities and resources and other artists in your community. You might not know them yet, but they exist, they're there.
I think that artists need to really dig into what is happening and need to engage at some level and participate. It's, of course, much easier to stay in your studio and work on your craft than it is to go out and pound the pavement, network, and be a creative entrepreneur.
Yeah, we like our alone time as artists. It can be quite isolating though, but we do like to sort of go into incubation, but there is a point where the artists, especially now, they do have to work the pavement, if you will, get out there, find the opportunities, find the resources that they can find, and if they can't find, make it themselves.
Right, and the sky's the limit, really. I think that the most successful artists I know are thinking on a very expansive scale. Oftentimes artists coming through like the educational system might look down upon commercial art or art that isn't maybe classified as fine art. So prints, postcards, books, these types of things. But I find a lot of very successful artists are creating things in what they would consider fine art, as well as these commercial products, and keeping their own creative voice consistent throughout. And that's one way to sort of shrug off this starving artist ideal.
So one thing that I want to clarify, because I do come from the educational system and I have a PhD, the term fine art, do you know how that came about?
Tell me.
So fine art was what they termed any art that wasn't basically commissioned. It was the art you made for yourself, that another patron wasn't, whether they hired you to paint the Sistine Chapel or the church or whatever, right?
Right.
Then that's when the term fine art came about. It was art that was just for the artist, that the artist was making. They weren't getting money from a patron to make, and that's where the term came from. So in reality, when we're thinking about that, it's twisted a bit, where fine art now is like this weird echelon of, it's fine art if you don't understand it right away, and it's in the corner of some museum, and it's tackling some huge theoretical purpose, but that's truly not the history of the term. It came about by people wanting to make art that they needed to make for them. And so I think that that's very cool. So I just wanted to...
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. But I think that there is, because we're coming at what an artist is, what art, all of those big questions that have been around forever, people get into this mindset of what is not going to work for them or what is going to work for them or what kind of artist they are. And again, I don't make prints and things like that right now. I always say that I'm open to it possibly in the future, but for me, just because of the materials I use and things like that, I'm not really interested in making prints.
Yeah, it doesn't translate for every artist.
Yeah. And again, you can decide, right? You can decide like how, what are the avenues that you want to take as an artist in order to bring the money in so that you don't have to be quote unquote starving, waiting for some museum to pick you up, 10 years into your practice and say, oh, now I've made it. Well, 3 years later, you're not in that museum anymore. And now you have to find another avenue or another person that believes in you. And hey, how about we just believe in ourselves? And
sure,
we are our biggest critic, but we're also our biggest advocate. And so artists, I think, especially now with everything that we have available to us, we need to get out there and just say, I'm here.
I hear you. And I think that it really does start with us. As an artist, we need to ask ourselves, what type of artist do we want to be? For some people, it's like, I want to be a sunshine artist and go out and do art fairs because I love being around people. For others, because most artists are very down, their heads are down and they're working in their art, and it's not, when I create my art, I'm not communicating with people around me. I am focused and in the mode. But then you have to switch gears and, engage in the world. If you want patrons, you want people to understand your art or receive your art. And so sunshine artists are one. Some artists decide they don't want to sell art. It's about creating the art, and that's their most important goal. For some artists, it's not even making a living. It's just maybe covering the cost of their supplies. There's a lot of different types of artists, right? But I think if you understand what type of artist you are, then as you start digging and finding artist opportunities, you can easily assess, is this going to help me accomplish my goals?
Yeah, and I think for this particular podcast, talking about the idea of you don't have to be a starving artist. I don't want to be a starving artist. So in terms of the resources that are out there, you're mentioning art fairs, right? That's one resource that people can use. Or they can create their own little fair themselves. If you live in a smaller area that doesn't have any art fairs, you can actually do that. That's how they all start, right? I've heard a lot of artists go, oh, well, or this association, this art fair, this thing, there was these organizers. Well, at one point, those people had to come together and say, hey, let's organize this thing, right? Artists can do that. Maybe make sure that when you're bringing people on board, you're bringing on people who share the same values as you, share the same work ethic as you, so that it's a bit more of a success the first time out, and you're not going, oh, I never want to do that again. But we can do it too. We can actually make those art fairs. We can do pop-ups. We can do these sorts of things. Don't you agree?
Yeah, my personal journey started when actually I was around 40 years old, and I realized that I had been denying this sort of creative force that was so important to me when I was younger. And so I just initially engaged in taking classes and improving my talent, finding my skills and finding my hand as an artist. And the most amazing thing happened as I surrounded myself with other artists, and some of them were like me, kind of just starting out, some were mid-career, some were professional. But as a group coming together, there was so much information readily available that if I had tried to go out into the world to, show my art and sell my art and have people respond to me as an artist, it would have been much more challenging than when I was surrounded with a bunch of people who were also doing that, who maybe already took a chance on that art fair or that gallery or this opportunity and could say, oh, that was a good one, go for it, it worked for me, or, those weren't really cool people and I wouldn't go back there again, so don't waste your time. And so I felt that my career moved along in a much faster path than I would have been as a solo artist.
Yeah, I think community is really important, and I do believe that even in the smallest of places you can find another artist, right? Maybe it's not another painter like you, or another sculptor like you, or another photographer like you, but maybe it's someone who is a musician. Maybe it's people who are creating theater or fashion shows, designers, right? They're, in the smallest of towns, you can find a couple of other like-minded souls, and you can create a small community for yourself, whether it's 3 people or 100, but that you guys can come together and you can sort of make something happen with what you're doing, either in terms of events, but also just in, like you're saying, that community connection. Again, art making is quite isolating, right? It's like you're going into, you know, your little womb to create something, right? And so it might be hard for artists to escape that and do some of the legwork to create a community. But like you're saying, there is nothing that is better than finding people who can sort of truly help you along the way in terms of advice, in terms of creative flow, right? Just sort of soaking in their creative flow with whatever they're working on.
Yeah, I think the buddy system is so important, just like the two of us getting together and having these conversations. Even though you're an artist and I'm a gallery owner who's sometimes an artist.
I was gonna say, wait a minute.
You know, we come at it with different perspectives sometimes, and I think it's really healthy to have those discussions and to share our energy and excitement. A lot of times, the journey, you know, because it's a long game, can feel like it's slogging along. And maybe that's why people sometimes think, oh, there's no resources around me. But having somebody that I can go to on a regular basis to help lift me up, to help inspire me, to keep me going, can make all the difference in the world.
Yeah, and I think also have that person, and I think that, you know, you're that for me too, is to sort of question ourselves against the other person, or to even sort of come up with like, what do you think about this? You know, I'm leaning towards it, I'm not, but this is bothering me. Again, to have that sort of touchstone, because if you do have people in your life that like live with you in sort of some sort of loved one's capacity, they don't probably understand all of it. And so when you can sort of connect with other artists that are removed a bit from you in like a personal, loved ones who will either be super supportive of everything you do, no matter what you do, or maybe they're like, I don't know why you're doing all this stuff. It's good to have a true touchstone of someone you trust, their opinion you trust, and the best way to do that is to go out there and find those people in your community. And if you truly can't find those people in your community, there is so Facebook and social media and all these things were actually generated for, was creating online communities so that people who felt very alone in the spaces that they were in could maybe find like-minded souls in a different town. And so I know that those groups still exist for some people. So you could do that as well if you truly can't find people within your sort of little small city that you have.
I have a group here that's connected with the studio door, and we use WhatsApp. And we've created an interface where we can have an area where we can put photos or put opportunities that we come across to share to each other, or even have a forum where we have a dialogue. And so then it becomes more than just like the two of us talking, it becomes a group of people engaging in the conversation, which is kind of what social media was supposed to do. And this is like sort of a private version of social media that is also very effective.
Yeah, I think because there's so many people who just are trying to take a little bit of time away from some of the social media sites. So having that sort of connected, but in a sort of have a boundary around it with like a WhatsApp. Facebook groups could possibly do that. You know, there's different ways. LinkedIn, there's different ways that you can, you know, find sort of your community of people. So speaking of social media, that just popped into my head randomly. Sorry. So talking about resources, like actual resources that people can do within their town. So nothing, you know, not anything that's specific to just where we're at right now. I have been seeing a ton of ads, because everything's ads right now on social media. I have been seeing a ton of ads of people really calling out saying, don't spend time with calls for art, which I have found really interesting. Now I know you do a couple of calls for art a year. What is your take on that? Because I'll tell you what I think after I hear from you, but.
Well, I'm a believer in calls for art because I think that art is a competition, and that through competition you can hone your skills as an artist. So I'm personally all in favor of that. As a gallery owner, I try to do programming that's it's not the same every month. It's not just juried shows every month. There's a wide variety of things that I do to try to meet the needs of the arts spectrum. But as an artist, I myself will set a certain amount of money each year for calls. And I think it's important for me to see if I can get my work into certain galleries, certain museums. I feel like that can elevate my prestige, which then helps me to connect with more patrons. And I think the bottom line that I want to get to in this conversation is that I think that an artist is mostly successful if they are constantly being seen by the public in a variety of spaces. And so for me, art calls are one way to do that.
Yeah, I was going to say exposure, right?
Yes.
It's that exposure consistently. I do very similarly for you when you said as an artist, I have a budget that I do for calls of art. When I first started, I would apply for everything that I saw, right? And then at the end of the year, and I'm sitting there doing my taxes, I was like, oh my goodness, because those, most calls for art, let's say, are between $20 and $50, somewhere in there. And that adds up quickly. And so I was like, the first year I went, oh no, I need to set aside a budget. So I do that too, like a monthly budget, although many months I won't spend any money because I'm very selective now in terms of the calls for art that I apply to. I do want to make sure, I do a little research. I look the place up. Is it a true brick and mortar or is it online? That's something to note. Doesn't mean that if it's just online, you shouldn't do it.
Right.
I've done online exhibition. But again, I love how you said how it sort of takes you up a notch in terms of what you're doing, and I think both in practice as well as in just sort of how you're seen. And so I do that sort of research. So if it's a gallery, I'm looking at the gallery. Is it a really, really small gallery now? Right now, because of where I'm at in my career, maybe that doesn't really work for me. And so I don't want to spend the money on that.
Sure.
Is it an online gallery that doesn't look like the website gets a lot of traffic? Because you can look those things up now. So I do that kind of research, but I do think, again, I think Calls for Art is a great resource for artists in terms of that exposure. I don't know how many times somebody would buy a piece of my art that they saw somewhere a year or two ago.
Sure.
And they're like, oh, I finally have enough money to buy one of your pieces. What's available? And I'm going, I don't even know you, right? And they're, well, 2 years ago, I saw you at this art fair or on this exhibition or at your studio. And I'm like, great. So I do agree with you. Like that consistent exposure, whatever that looks like for you, whatever you can afford is necessary.
I think that, the whole area of calls for artists would be a great topic for another podcast.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot to be said about that. Yeah. What I really want to dig into is what are the variety of access points that artists can engage in. And some of those we've already flitted upon in this conversation. Art fairs, art associations. Those can be things that are artist groups under a museum or a nonprofit. It could be a totally focused group, like a photography group, a watercolor society, or something like that. But there's all kinds of associations, and that's the great place to build that community. But there are other types of resources beyond galleries that artists can engage in. And what are some of the spaces that you have as an artist engaged in your journey?
creating my own pop-ups when I couldn't sort of get my stuff out there to be seen in the world.
Right.
Some of those were successful, some other ones not so successful, even though I worked hard. So it's okay to fail, just keep going. But yes, definitely creating your own pop-ups, both as a solo artist as well as in groups. Doing events. I've done an event with another abstract artist. We called it the Abstract Duet. And rented out a space and did that for just a couple of days. So pop-ups. Grants. Grants are huge and often overlooked because, let's face it, most grants are towards a specific project or like a public sculpture or a museum curated, we'll give you $50,000 to come up with a project for this museum for these months to these months. But there are grants out there that are specific to creators of all sorts, individual creators, and I think that's a huge resource. Have you had success with grants and things like that in your journey as an artist, or even as like a gallerist?
As a journey as an artist, yes. As a gallerist, because I'm a for-profit entity, because I'm trying to lead by example in the creative entrepreneur realm. I'm not in a nonprofit, and the nonprofits certainly have more access to funding than small business in the arts realm. But as you were talking, I was just thinking about an artist that I was working with recently, and I was so impressed with her because she was definitely out there making things happen. So she had received a grant to do work specifically bringing Chicana art into the community, and she was paired with a nonprofit to do so, and that nonprofit disappeared by the time that the grant funds were to come.
Oh.
And so she reached out to me, and I hooked her up with another nonprofit, and so then she had kind of had to start all over in envisioning how she was going to make that grant happen. But because she had contacted me, I happened to have a mural alley behind the gallery, and I had a space. And so she was able to create a mural in that space through that nonprofit and grant. And there was another space a block away that I had been trying for several years to get with no luck. And she went directly to the property managers, presented an idea, and got that space. And I was like, wow, that's true initiative.
Yeah.
And it's something that people forget that they can do. As an artist, we have the ability to bring art into all different realms of the community. And reaching out to property owners and businesses is one way to bring that to fruition. Another muralist in that same alley, I've seen his work in bathrooms at bars, in walls of pizza shops. He's bringing the outdoor murals into the businesses and convincing them to take that chance on him, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, I was just thinking another thing that I've done in the past is I've contacted realtors because they have to put stagings together sometimes, not all the time, but stagings together for when they're putting, a room or a house together to sell. And they oftentimes want a few pieces of art up there. Now that would be not necessarily they would maybe buy it all right out. Maybe it would be a rental, something like that. But that's another thing that artists can think about is there are people who rent their art out for specific things, being in movies, that's a huge one, in television shows, renting their art out for gala events and things like that. I definitely say make sure you have a really good, tight written contract. If anything happens to your work, who's responsible for that, make sure you have insurance, all that kind of stuff. But those are some different resources as well, specifics that, again, thinking outside the box a little bit from just what we're told in school. If you went to school, or even if you're around other artists, you hear over and over again, art exhibitions, galleries, museums, huge patron going to come in and save you and buy all of your stuff all of the time. And that's generally not the case. You need, I think, the more avenues you can explore, the more resources that you are going to have available to you, so that you don't have to sit around and go, oh, I'm part of the starving artist trope.
Yeah, I have a business mentor, and she calls me an entrepreneur.
Entrepreneur, I love it.
And I think if more artists would think of themselves as business people, as entrepreneurs, then the world does open up a little bit. So you were talking about some opportunities. A way to access those opportunities is to go to those business mixers in your community and introduce yourself not only as an artist, but, pitch your offer. Say, I'm looking to do art inside business walls. I'm looking to stage, rentals. And you never know where that's going to go. So you might be talking to somebody who's not the right fit for that, but in their network there might be somebody. And as you build those relationships, then it becomes a full network, not a hierarchy.
Yeah, again, like you were mentioning with the person who you were able to sort of reattach them to a different kind of nonprofit, you never know when the networking in the community is going to sort of hit, right? So you might go to mixers, because this is one of the things I think that trips people up. They go to a business mixer, or they start in creating their community, and it doesn't work out right away, not personality-wise. I do think that you should be very careful with who you spend time with, and if you do get really bad feelings about a particular person, you don't have to hang out with them, right?
Right.
But if you are taking the time to go to these mixers and go to openings at galleries and do all of these things, even when you're not in the show, and you're networking and you're doing all that stuff, and you're doing it out of a space of because you want to be successful as an artist, not in, I don't know what other reason you would be doing it, but you want to forge community, you want to be a successful artist. You don't know when that's going to pay off, if it's ever going to pay off, but you don't know. What happens, it happened to me and it happens to a lot of people, is maybe they go to one mixer, or they get a table somewhere and they rent it out, and they're, and it is a bust. For that evening, it's a bust. I didn't sell anything. I did an art fair, didn't sell anything one year. You never know when it's gonna pay off. A year, 2 years later, had people of that art fair that I was like, well, that was a total bust. They had stayed on my email list, and they came back and they actually bought pretty expensive, large paintings from me at that point. They're like, we love your work, we're just waiting for the right time. So again, it's it's that exposure, it's that you're talking about getting out there and doing a multitude of different things, and networking and walking the walk and doing the work and thinking like a business person, if that's what you want to be as an artist, right? Some artists, I'm just going to create and I'm going to hire a bunch of other people to do all that stuff, and that's fine too.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, you got that, great.
I think that it's important to plant seeds.
Yes.
And I know from my own experience of doing an art fair that I was doing a 2-day art fair, and watching other booths sell when I wasn't selling. It was real hard to sort of pull myself up and get excited about the second day. And then, if you put on a sour face, no one's gonna want to buy from you or hang out with you.
Yeah, you're sitting there in the corner nothing's selling.
You need to believe in yourself, pump yourself up, even when you feel a little down, and be there and be present. And I think also about planting seeds. If you're going to a networking opportunity, there's one way you present yourself. But if you're going to someone else's exhibition, you don't want to step on that artist. You don't want to go up to the gallery owner and start pitching your services, because they're there to sell that night and engage with the patrons. So you have to think about the moment you're in and what's appropriate. But it's, if I went to an exhibition, I think that being seen letting people know that I'm an artist, and maybe even just dropping that question to the gallery owner, like, you know, what's the way that I should approach you when it's not a gallery event? And they'll tell you, call me, email me, set an appointment, and then follow through. Always follow through.
But not even to mention though that maybe you go to these exhibitions. First of all, you get to see a lot of work yourself, and as an artist, I think that is important to sort of see what is in your community. Not to alter how you're making things or what you're making, but just to see like what is being shown. But you could see or find artists whose work you absolutely love, and that could create a fantastic connection between you and that artist for future things together, or again, creating a group, creating a community, right? So it's not even just about exposing yourself to the gallery owner and the people that are there. It's about sort of, again, that idea of like, I need the community, I need fellow artists, I love your work, let's get together and make something happen.
Some other resources to consider would be looking at the city or the government around you. Most government agencies do have an art department, whether they're doing public art or they're funding the nonprofits. Those nonprofits typically have to go through some sort of application process in order to get the funds. And then when they do get the funds, they need to spend that. And so they're looking for artists who can execute their mission. And so if you're doing work, for example, as a gay man, I'm part of the LGBTQ community, you know, there are nonprofits who are getting funds to do that kind of work within my community. And so maybe there's an opportunity for me to do workshops or to sell them art or to lead some sort of arts programming for them. And that can always then again lead to other opportunities. You know, it's about building those connections. So attending city meetings, finding out who's getting that funding, and it's all about that research and participation.
Yeah, local libraries are a big one. If you have a local library, oftentimes they will, you know, do mini little shows here and there and put art on the walls as well. But again, you can be the one to say, hey, I'll take this on, I'll curate it. How would you like it? You know, you mentioned the person who's in the pizza shops, the coffee shops, the stuff, like, you can be the one to go to the business owner or property manager, realtor, whatever it is, and say, hey, you know what would be fantastic? How about I put some works on the walls in here, make it available, you know, can we put the artist's name and the contact information if someone's interested in the piece, so you don't even have to sell it yourself if you don't even want to deal with it. I'm just going to put it up there with some contact information, right? So there's all these sorts of ways to get that exposure, and I think that again it does go down to research, because here's the thing, it can get very overwhelming very quickly. You go on Cafe for calls for art is a great one, and you go on there and it's just one call after another, and there's like 18 and they're all due tomorrow, you know, and you're like, it can get really overwhelming really fast. So I suggest, you know, have set time, weekly, monthly, whatever works better for you, bi-monthly, have set time to do research. Research your cities, research the governments, research grants, research, I mean, again, it's so much easier for us now with the internet.
Oh, yeah.
You know, remember the days back in the day where, you know, there was the card catalogs and just to find a book. But there's all these ways that you can find out so much information about your particular community. And again, if you truly can't find anything, build it yourself. Go into a vacant space that says rent, you know, for rent. Go and call the number and say, well, I don't want to rent this forever. What would it look like if I rented this out for a week? What would it look like if I rented it out for just 1 month or a weekend? What would that look like? And start to get those sorts of ideas. Again, exposure, putting yourself out there. And it doesn't mean that you're a sellout. It means you're trying to get your art out there, and that's the purpose.
Right.
For artists who are trying to sell their art, not for the artists who are just doing it for themselves and hold on to their art, but the people who are out there.
I think we should also mention education, because besides like university paths, and degrees, MFAs and that sort of thing. If you look around, you might find that there is specific education out there that can help you. So I'm thinking of two things. One is I know that some galleries or nonprofits that are thriving and trying to meet artists at different levels have different types of programming, and some of that's education, whether it be a gallery that's offering classes or workshops for artists in how to engage with them or how to present themselves to galleries. There's a whole set of things that artists can learn sort of on the business and marketing side. And then also there's, the nonprofit groups that might have an art space, and they fill it not only with exhibitions, but workshops. And some of those workshops might be very specific, like portraiture painting, or, how to throw clay without using a kiln. But they might also have some other things like critique classes, or specific ways for artists to help themselves to engage in the arts community.
Yeah, you mentioned when you were 40 and you went and actually took classes. I was very similar. My background is in performance, but I would dabble in visual arts privately to myself. And when I decided that, wow, this is really where my head is now moving, it's moving away from performance and more towards visual art. For me, I needed to up my level a bit, feel like I had a little bit more skills in my toolbox. And so I did take drawing classes, even though I was interested in moving more into abstraction. I took realistic drawing classes, making the lemon cake, and the pie and the still lifes. I did that. Right. I did classes in abstraction because it was something I wasn't familiar with. And so I just wanted to see sort of what was out there. But a big one, and I know you'll agree with me, maybe not, but I know you'll agree with me because you've mentioned before, when you're talking about that business networking and going to that kind of stuff, I think it's really helpful for artists if you don't have a background in business, you don't have a background in sort of promotions or marketing, go to those kinds of workshops too. Because as you said, like an entrepreneur, I think we box ourselves in so much as artists. Like, we have to go about something a certain way because somewhere in our head, we got it in our head that we have to go about it in a certain way. Like, these are the steps. First I do this, then I do that. Right. Then I go to a museum, then I go. And I think that this time of age, what's happening in our world currently, what's available to us, it's important to, if that works for you, if that's the structure you really want, that's fine. But it's also okay to expand yourself and to really take those workshops of, how do you market? Or how about some just basic layout so you can make your own marketing materials, some basic Photoshop or InDesign, whatever it is that you want to use. I think that's really helpful for artists to sort of, again, think about all those resources that are out there for you.
And it's really important. I think that the way a person talks about themselves or visually presents themselves outside of their art, like on social media or marketing images, is really important. And I think that just by doing is really the way you get to the solution. If you wait until you're going to perfect everything, you're not going to get there. And so you have to just do it. I also want to say, because I know that we're throwing a lot of different things out there, and it's like, yeah, this is a little overwhelming, and being an artist means that if you want to survive and get out there and be seen repetitively in different spaces, that's a lot of work. And so I always go back to, planning and sitting down and saying, what are my goals? What do I have the time to do? And how can I use that time the most effectively?
Yeah.
So if I want to write a grant, then that might take me, weeks to refine. So then I'm not going to also at that same time be engaging and going out to networking meetings and calling for these other opportunities. I have to decide what is the opportunity that's going to give me the biggest bang right now. And art is a long journey. It's a long game. And so I think that it's really wise that you kind of pace yourself and think about how you're going to approach these and then approach them systematically in a way that's comforting to you.
Yeah, I get overwhelmed very quickly. It's just part of my personality. So I can get overwhelmed very quickly. So I really plan things out. I have like Monday nights, 15, 20 minutes, and I'll say for 15, 20 minutes, just look for art calls. Just look for, you're not applying, just look. And you can whittle it down. And then I have other times during the month or during the week that I sit down and go, okay, now this is when you actually apply. Same with grants, things like that. But I love how you talk about focusing your goals. I know that we here at the Studio Door recently had sort of a meeting of our community of artists where we sat down and really thought about how important it is to, because everything can become so overwhelming and there is so many resources out there, which is why we get a little irked when people say there's not enough out there. There's almost too much.
Right.
Solidifying your goals for the year or for the quarter, maybe you're real specific and you want to do like, what is just my goal this month? Is my goal to, really just focus on grants and art calls, or is it to focus on getting a community together? Or maybe my goal is, because what happens often is one of two things. Either you don't do anything because you're so overwhelmed with like the business stuff, right? And then hopefully you're still painting or working on your art form. Or opposite, you spend too much time on the business side of things and the marketing and I gotta post this and I gotta get that and I gotta do all this exposure, and your art practice is suffering.
Right.
So I find it, as you're saying, planning, scheduling, creating a budget, creating a time budget, right, of how much time you're really gonna spend on these things so that your art practice does not suffer, because at the end of the day, that's gotta be where you're spending a good chunk of time. At least 50% should be on your art making.
I agree. So I think what we'll do at this point is we'll list some of the ideas and resources that we discussed today into the messages underneath the podcast and the YouTube video here.
Yeah, I love that idea. And that way you all can sort of, especially like the resources for where you can find some calls for arts or grants, things like that, so that you can get your stuff together, formulate it through your focused goals, and start getting that exposure that you need. So you don't have to be a starving artist anymore if that's how you're positioning yourself now.
We hope that you enjoyed today's podcast, and we look forward to seeing you again beyond gallery walls.
We would appreciate input, insights, anything from you. We'd love to hear from you.